Good morning. As Cheryl said, my name is Rachel Jackson. I've been attending this church for about 18 years. We started coming when my youngest was born, so that I always know how long we've been here. I have two boys. One is a sophomore in college, and he is flying over Pennsylvania right now. I just checked, on his way back to school in Atlanta. Classes start tomorrow at 8, and he's flying back today. That's how he rolls. My second is a rising senior in high school. And today, I have served here over the years as faith group leader on the curriculum team. I have been an elder, and now I'm on the teaching team. And today I have the privilege of bringing you a message as part of our parenting series, Parenting Extraordinary Kids. And when I heard the title and was invited to speak on it, I was like, well, that's no pressure. When the teaching team got together, we always get together before a series to sort of plan it out so everything flows. And we got together, Dorian, Angie, Mike, and I, and we got into Mike's office, and he said, so, is everybody excited to be teaching on parenting? And we all went, sure. And I think that's because we've all survived the birth through middle school years. We've made it through the disciplining and training years. We now all have high school or college-age children, and so we're learning how to be coaches, and we're learning how to consult. We've been through some stuff along the way. Now, if you'd asked me to speak on parenting when my kids were like 2 and 4, I would have been like, this is exciting. Everything's going great. I have control. We have routines. But as Mike said in his main message, 3 essentials for building a family, something happened with our kids along the way that changed the nature of our parenting. First, they learned how to say no, and second, they learned how to start walking away. The more bold they became in saying no, and the more confident they became in walking away, the more harrowing it became to parent. So 2 weeks ago, Mike opened this series talking about how to be a good role model for our kids. And last week, Angie picked it up talking about how to pass our faith on to our kids. I get to speak on setting fair and realistic expectations for our kids. We set expectations because we want our children to succeed in life. We want them to have a good life. We have hopes and dreams for them that we think that will make them happy. But they don't always share in our hopes and dreams for them. Sometimes our children don't share in them at all, and that can cause tension in our relationships. So how can we set expectations for our children that are reasonable and fair? And why is Rachel Jackson teaching on this? When Mike shared a few weeks ago that I was teaching on this topic, I was sitting next to one of my children, and I stared at the screen and went, awkward. And then my second son came to me just like last week, and he said, Mom, I'm filling out a questionnaire for the teacher who's writing my letter of recommendation, but I'm going to skip the optional question on excessive parental pressure because, and I quote, I've decided not to throw you under the bus. You see, I'm the mom that other moms send tiger emojis to, accompanied by the sentence, wow. So I've been through some things with my kids. I've learned some things the hard way, and I'm hoping that by sharing some things out of God's word that I have learned, maybe you won't have to. So why do we set expectations for our kids in the first place? Doesn't that just put undue pressure on them? So when we start setting expectations for our young children, we set them to keep them safe, to establish a foundation for their lives, and to teach them how to navigate the world. Christian parents set expectations for their kids that we hope will help our children begin to grow in their own faith in God. Now, when our kids are really little, this is much easier to do because we do have so much control over what family life looks like. We set the routines. We set what's for dinner. We set what entertainment comes into our house. We have so much influence over the foundation on which our children begin to grow. We get to be their primary influence. And it's in these years that we set expectations designed to establish the character qualities we want to see in our kids. Because when they're really little, we have no idea who they're going to be. I used to look at my oldest little face, and I'd be like, who are you going to be? And I was jealous of parents who had teens who kind of were getting to see who their kids were going to be. So we don't know that yet. But what we do know is that we can start teaching them to build character qualities like how to be helpful, how to be respectful, and how to have self-control, how to apologize when they're wrong, and how to extend grace when other people apologize to them. And we hope that by setting expectations about behavior, we are starting to embed character qualities in them that will ultimately inform a life of faith in God, rooted in godly wisdom and discernment. We want them to learn how to live in verses like Colossians 3:12-14. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them together in perfect unity. Or we want them to start learning how to live in Galatians 5. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. I didn't need to know what my children's interests were or talents were going to be in order to start grounding them in God's word and setting expectations for them that would mold their characters. As our children grow, we pray that this teaching pierces their hearts and moves from expected behavior to embedded character qualities and ultimately to lives deeply rooted in the kind of godly wisdom and discernment that leads to rich and fulfilling lives. And when we take our job seriously, we are setting our children up for success. They have to listen to us, but before they can listen, we have to teach. Our teaching is a gift. Proverbs 1 says, "Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. They are a garland to grace your head and a chain to adorn your neck." Or he goes on in Proverbs 2, "My son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you, turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understanding, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. Then you will understand what is right and just and fair, every good path. For wisdom will enter your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Discretion will protect you, and understanding will guard you." When we set expectations for the kinds of behavior that lead to embedded godly character qualities, we are building a foundation of wisdom and understanding in our children's lives that ultimately serve as garlands to grace their necks and chains to adorn their heads and chains to adorn their necks. Those gifts go with them everywhere. There's going to be some time in the teen years, you're not going to see them. Maybe you will. The problem is that our kids don't stay sheltered in our homes forever. We don't have that kind of influence forever because the balance of influence starts to shift. Slowly at first as we start sending them out of the house, but more quickly as they age and they are spending more time out of the house and they're making new friends. Now some days that shift feels manageable. I had days when I was like, we're okay, things are going great, okay. And other days, those shifts feel cataclysmic. And on the cataclysmic days, I don't know how you respond, but I responded by tightening my grip. And when I tightened my grip, I held really fast to my expectations and maybe even raised them a bit. Tensions grow as our kids' worlds open up to the influences outside the home, just as they're getting really good at saying no and walking away. But as the world opens up to them in that way, new opportunities are also presenting themselves outside of the house that can change the nature of our expectations. We start adding to the character quality expectations, like, I still want you to be helpful and respectful and kind, but if you could also be a football star, a straight-A student, and maybe a virtuoso violinist, that would be good too. But no, really, really be helpful and kind. But also kind of be the football star. You know, in fact, can you be all of it? Somewhere along the line, our godly character expectations for our children can start bleeding into worldly expectations. And we can get caught up in our own hopes and dreams for our kids in ways that out-prioritize the godly character expectations we started grounding them in. We may say we don't, but our actions speak louder than words. Those added expectations may be tied to hopes and dreams that we have for our kids that they don't share. Or they may be tied to our own ambitions and insecurities and regrets. Or they might highlight our pride in ways that our pride has never been highlighted before. Not the pride that comes from, I'm so proud of you as I watch you do something that brings you joy, but the pride that comes from, what you do is a reflection on me. Don't embarrass me. Oh, you say that sounds so extreme. Parents aren't really like that. Have you sat on the sideline of an 8-year-old basketball game while a father coaching his son's team turns purple because his poor kid made a bad pass? Or have you watched and listened as a baseball coach told a 10-year-old, I'm not letting you pitch because I want to win? I've heard that. And it's not just sports. It's whatever pursuit a parent or an adult has somehow tied to unrealistic or unfair hopes and dreams. When we do that, we lose sight of what is best for our kids and make it all about us. So a key to adjusting to keeping our expectations healthy and fair is constantly evaluating and adjusting them. Now, I don't mean being wishy-washy with them. I mean being thoughtful, prayerful, and flexible with them. We can start by evaluating our expectations in light of our children's behavior. Let's examine Ephesians 6:4. I want to run through it in 3 different translations with a little help from the dictionary to amplify the message. From the NIV, fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Fathers, do not intensely irritate and frustrate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Or from the New American Standard Version, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Fathers, do not deliberately annoy your children and try to make them behave aggressively, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. But I think my favorite one, the one I really rested in and I didn't need the dictionary to amplify, was the Message. Fathers, don't frustrate your children with no-win scenarios. Take them by the hand and lead them in the way of the Master. When I meditate on this verse, I think of these quotes that I've heard over the past 6 months in various places. 1, behavior is the language of children who have lost their voice, by Dr. Catherine Purvis, who is a child development researcher. And having unrealistic expectations of kids is one of the biggest barriers to a child's healing and our ability to connect with them. Don't expect them to do something they are simply incapable of doing. Kim Botto, a very wise woman that I had the opportunity to meet at a writers' conference back, I think, in February. When a child loses his or her voice or is asked to do something they simply are incapable of doing, that feeling of frustration and helplessness is likely to come out in their behavior. Every kid is different. You can parent 2 kids in the same house in the same way with 2 very different outcomes. Flexibility allows you to parent each child according to whom God made that child to be. Flexing is not weakness, it's actually strength. You can be flexible and consistent. You can be consistent and make exceptions. You don't want to live by the exceptions, that's chaos. But you can be consistent and make exceptions. Flexing allows you to take a child by the hand and lead them in the context of who they are and according to the nature of your relationship with them. If we lose our relationships with our children, we lose our influence. So in light of the above, what can we do? 1, align our expectations with who God created our children to be, your children to be. I'm about to share an example that I've shared before, but it just keeps applying, and I'm sure some of you here haven't heard it. It was one Christmas when I came up with the brilliant idea with my young children of cutting out butcher paper 4 feet tall, and we were going to draw and paint Christmas trees and hang these Christmas trees on the boys' doors, and then we were going to decorate the trees. I thought this was going to be a fun I was home, it was cold, I got little kids, it was something to do. I expected the Christmas trees to look like Christmas trees, so I brought out the green paint. And one of my kids didn't just want green paint. Now, I don't have to tell you which of my kids painted which tree. If you know my kids, and just so you know, I have permission to tell any of these stories as long as I'm the one who comes out looking bad, which I can assure them. Okay. This is Cameron's tree. He's the one on the plane down to Georgia Tech right now. Cameron lives his life in the real. He wants to know how the world works, and everything he does and everything he comes up with is in the context of how he knows the world works. He would only paint a Christmas tree green. When I look at that tree, I know it's his, and I love it. This is Jax's tree. Jax thinks outside the box. Don't hem me in, is Jax's motto. He would only ever paint a Christmas tree every color in the rainbow. And when I look at it, I see him, and I love it. Psalm 139, 13-14 says, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well." The God who created the spring flowers may have made your child an artist. And the God who arranged all the atoms and chemicals in the world may have made your child a scientist. And the God who put physics into the universe may have made your child an engineer. God has created your child uniquely according to some facet of who God is. Why would we want our children to live up to any other standard? When our children feel free to be themselves, they flourish, just like we do. But when they are forced to live up to our unrealistic expectations, something inside them wilts. Where in your parenting might you be falling prey to this one? Now, this one is sneaky because you may not be overtly even stating any expectations. But kids have a way of absorbing them anyway. Our family has a lot of engineers in it. There's a lot of math happening in my family. But not everybody is an engineer, okay? Now, my niece was the first to sort of break out into something truly creative. She's a model. And if you've been to Target lately, you may have seen her hanging on the wall. This past spring, she styled one of the stars for the Oscars. She was an assistant, but that's what she was doing. She is doing something that takes a lot of guts and a lot of hard work. And even though nobody's ever told her, you have to be an engineer, I know, because she has told me, she still feels this weight of, I'm not towing the family line. Meanwhile, she's forging this remarkable path. I'm not hanging on the wall at Target. Who does that? We don't have to state expectations in order to pass them on. What is your child's behavior telling you? Is your child fighting to be seen or heard? Is your child wilting under the pressure to conform to their idea of your expectations? And if you're sitting here saying, I know, but if I let my child follow their dreams, they're going to starve. And to that I say, because I hear you, I have had to up my coaching game. I've had to find a way to take my creative child's natural bent and figure out what's he going to do that speaks to his heart, but also gives him some marketable skills. It's hard work, but that's my job. Identify where your expectations for your children reflect your own interests, ambitions, insecurities, or regrets, and be honest. I went to a Central District Music Festival concert. They take kids audition from all the choruses and orchestras and bands around Massachusetts, and then they get selected, and then you go have a concert. So I was there, and I was sitting next to a guy whose son was in the district orchestra. And he just started chit-chatting with me, and he said, so I'm a soccer player. And he said, and my older son is a soccer player, right? I love soccer. This guy had a lot of ambitions for his son. He said, but then my second son came to me and he said, Dad, I want to join the Worcester Youth Symphony Orchestra. And he said, we live in Sudbury. And I balked at that. I was like, buddy, like we're not driving to Worcester once a week so that you can be in the Worcester Youth Symphony Orchestra. And the kid, let's just clap for a moment, said, so you're willing to drive all over the eastern seaboard every weekend for my brother's club soccer? And the guy was like, and he said, this orchestra is my club soccer. He spoke the dad's language, and the dad was like gobsmacked. He hadn't even thought about it. It never occurred to him not to drive everywhere for soccer. But the 1 hour a week to Worcester just seemed like too much. That man sat there. The orchestra was amazing. I cried. I didn't have a kid in the orchestra, and I cried. But seriously, he sat next to me and cried. He was so proud. Now, for me, I set many of my expectations, not so much out of those kinds of interests and ambitions, but out of my own regrets, right? How many things that I wish I had done that I didn't do, and I didn't want my kids to live in regrets. I think that's a good thing. But I also kind of wanted to live vicariously through them as they did the things that I regretted not doing, and that was dysfunctional. Where are your expectations more about what's left unfulfilled in you than it is about what is best for your children? Prioritize your parent-child relationships. Here's where the tears start to flow. I'm just kidding. I'm going to be strong. Understand that your child's compliance with your expectations does not necessarily reflect the strength of your relationship with him or her. God has high expectations for us. But he leads us to follow his will within the context of a loving relationship. He does not just set the expectations here and then leave us to struggle to meet them. I think of a couple of verses that I didn't make into the slide deck. From John 10:14, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Relationship. But the advocate, from John 14:26 and 27, the Holy Spirit whom the Father will send in my name will teach you all things and will remind you of everything I have said to you. Peace I leave you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid. These verses, as so many others, speak to how God leads us in the context of relationships. Christians who try to live the lofty ideals of the Christian life without leaning into their relationship with their Heavenly Father crash and burn. They burn out. Sometimes they just walk away. It is no different with our relationships with our kids when we set high standards and we don't give them the right support within the context of a healthy relationship to meet them. Now, I've got two completely different boys. When they were younger, one always did exactly what I asked him to do without question. Whatever the expectations were, he rose up to meet them. The other one gave us constant pushback. Now, which one do you think was easier to parent? The compliant one. Which one do you think my friends loved watching me try to parent? The willful one. Now, when you have a compliant child, it's really easy to put your relationship with them on autopilot and think, I'm really good at this. And when you have a willful child, it's really easy to find yourself doing battle every day and think, what am I doing wrong? Compliant children absorb our expectations as if they're breathing them in, but forgetting to exhale. As the years pass and the expectations increase, the internal pressure grows, and our compliant child's heart, mind, and soul can start to look like this. Now, with my compliant child, I kept blowing air into the balloon, but as long as the balloon remained intact, I just assumed everything was okay. And then we had an encounter that I consider my lowest point in parenting him, Carla Dobosh. It was spring of his senior year. And he was on the robotics team. He was on a lot of teams. That's just how that kid rolled. And he was taking really hard classes, and everything was just crashing down on him at once. He usually shouldered everything. You wouldn't even know he was stressed. But this time, he had a 3-day robotics competition coming up, and he made a passing comment to me, I've got a physics test next week, and I don't know that I have any time to study. And I was like, okay. And I was like patting myself on the back for being the mom that was like, okay. And about a week later, my friend Carla mentioned to me, so I hear the entire physics class bombed the test last week. And I was like, what? So then I had to go look at Canvas. And I saw the stats for the class, and I knew what the average was, and I knew the high and the low. And I went into my son, and I sat down, and I said, so I understand that pretty much the whole class bombed the quiz last week. And he went, yep. And then I said, but I saw that someone got 100. And if it was possible to get 100 on that test, I expect that should have been you. You're like, I've heard her speak so much. I thought she was really affable. Okay, this is my weak point, okay? So he stared at me with eyes that went straight through me, and I, in the moment, knew I was screwing up. I was like, Mayday, Mayday, pull up, eject, we're in a flat spin. Like the Russian commander in the Hunt of Red October, I had just torpedoed my own ship, and I knew it. But I couldn't stop because their torpedo was out of the hold. And I finished with the heartwarming words, I expect you to ace the next one. I submit to you the result. This was our relationship circa June 2023. He did not lash out. This is the compliant child. 6'4", he could have sent me into the next county. He gritted his teeth and he said, understood. I kept adding air to the balloon because he always had let me. It was like a habit. Now, compare this to my relationship with my willful child. I put equal pressure on him, he would assure you. But he has always refused to absorb it. He has always refused to absorb my expectations and be filled to the point of bursting. As I look back, his constant and consistent pushback has been like a pressure valve. This kid has been letting off steam since birth. Now that made, he's dying. He's like, she's so, okay, she nailed it. That made parenting him in the day-to-day that much harder, right? It was exhausting. People knew it. My older son came to me one day. He had to have been like 7. He was like, Mom, I have no idea how to handle my brother, and I am guessing that neither do you. I was like, you're not wrong. But the constant challenge that he gave me forced me to always be trying to be creative in figuring out how to connect with him. We clear the air much more in the moment. The communication lines are always open, and he's forced that on me, and it's a wonderful thing. Do you have a child who works really hard to meet your expectations? Do you have one who's willing to push back? Have you thought about what those tendencies actually mean for your relationships with them? Where do you need to redouble your efforts to reconnect with them? So the last thing I want to just hit on is As part of this exercise, address where you struggle to trust in God. Because for me, the last 20 years have highlighted the weaknesses in my own faith in God, where I have struggled to trust him. Because parenting has a way of forcing us to our knees. We don't get handed a baby and a handbook. I could not turn to page 497, senior year, how to react when entire class bombs physics quiz. But as I've processed and unpacked what has gone well and what has gone sideways over the past 20 years, I've come to realize that parenting has just shined a light on the dark corners of my own faith that have needed work. For me, it was in loosening my grip and trusting God to take control and set the course for my kids. And when I finally let him, because I was forced to, because my kid went off to Atlanta and he never needed to come back if he didn't want to, I was forced to, I found out that God really can blow our minds. First, he introduced me to the following verse and reminded me that he tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. I have spent the last year camped out here. Then he prompted me to apologize to my son. And then after that, he spent the last year, didn't mean to do that. Last year putting me through a release your grip and trust in me boot camp. And I've learned a couple of quick things. One, our Father really does tend his flock like a shepherd. He really does gather the lambs in his arms. He carries us close to his heart, and he gently leads those that have young. He really does. He is a way maker. He is working when we can't see it and when we can't feel it. And if I could tell you the stories of the past 365 days, I would, but that would take another 30 minutes. But if you're struggling in this, let's have coffee. 2, when we humble ourselves before our children, we model for them what it looks like to grow in our own faith and encourage them in how they might grow in theirs. The path to growth is messy and littered with mistakes, but God does great things when we tumble into his arms. And finally, our children can be grace givers when we give them the opportunity to be. When my son showed me grace, which he did literally 20 minutes after I sent him the apology email, which I was afraid to hit send. I was like, he's not even going to open it when he sees it's from me. That's how bad it was. And 20 minutes later, I received grace. I got to see a glimpse of the garland gracing his head and the chain adorning his neck, gifts that we had worked so hard to give him so many years ago. At 7:51 this morning, from the airport, he texted, "Thanks for a great visit home." In this last year, both of my kids have thanked me for holding the standards high. They've thanked me for setting high expectations. They both told me, "That's not what you needed to apologize for, Mom." In our family, it wasn't the what, it was the how. That I refused to flex when the situation required it. That I let our relationships suffer at the hands of their accomplishments. It wasn't the what, it was the how. Now for you, it might be the what. It might be the how. It might be both. You may not be sure, but you just know that your relationship with your child is suffering. If you're wanting to know what to do, ask your kids. They'll tell you.